Hi, I'm Daniel, and before the episode starts, I want to briefly talk to you about the Garden Outreach Project, a WCF program focused on putting faith into action. Our mission is to inspire and support Christadelphians in North America to share Christ's love through outreach initiatives. This is done by facilitating national and local outreach activities, supplying resources, and providing funds to help brothers and sisters serve those in need. For example, in 2020, over 40 ecclesial groups participated in our Bags of Love initiative, which saw over 800 sleeping bags distributed to shelters and those without a home. If you, your ecclesia, or CYC want to learn more and get involved with our latest initiative, please visit our website at www.thegardenoutreach.org. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Garden Outreach for the latest news and encouragement. And now, here's the show.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Levi. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's almost a year. We're recording on March 8th since we started COVID. So March 16th was the day that I left work and said goodbye to many of my coworkers who I haven't seen since. So we're a week ahead of that. But yeah, it's just wild. And I think we wanted to do a kind of year in review podcast, me and you, about COVID and what this year has been like. And yeah, because we did one a month after, or like a week after, which is a fun listen. We're going to refer to that a bunch, I think. So this is the time to have a conversation, I think, about what this year's been like.
Yeah, thinking back to that podcast, I mean, I remember you saying to me, like, we sound so positive, like we were only 2 weeks in, and that even that 2 weeks felt like an age. And now, like, the whole past year feels like forever. Like, sometimes it's hard to remember all the times before.
Yeah.
And how that was so different.
I feel like there's even sections of the lockdown and sections of the pandemic. Like pre-summer was like March, April, May of 2020 was like a whole different time, and then the beginning of the summer, beginning with I think the kind of the race riots and the killing of George Floyd and stuff that happened, was like that was another level, right? And then there was this positivity kind of in August and September, and then the cases rose significantly, and now we're in kind of another positive kind of time period. So it's just it feels like multiple years of experience, in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm excited to kind of recap a little bit, and also talk about what we've learned here through all of this.
Yeah, definitely. Just listening back to our previous episode, like we mentioned the grocery store like loads, which I think even now, like, hasn't food, like, we became obsessed with meals and having enough food, and even missing, you and I both as like extroverts and gatherers,
Yeah.
we really be missing having people around our tables.
Right.
And that's been a huge loss for this past year of having that that connection.
Yeah, connection is exactly it. I mean, what we've learned exactly the limitations of what you can do over Zoom. We've learned the limitations of worship. Man, there's so many conversations to go through. A year ago, we had this podcast where we mentioned gloves and people wearing gloves in the grocery store, and no mention of masks at all. Like, masks clearly became, much more important. We talked about our first Zoom church. Like, we recorded after both of us had our first Zoom meeting, and we talked about it like in a loving and endearing way, in like a positive way, which I thought was funny because it's clearly been a problem or like a roadblock to a lot of people. We just didn't mention like mental health at all. Like, we weren't worried about people's minds and what was going to happen to how we thought. You talked about trying to homeschool Henry and just kind of the whole education going home. And then we had one line about how social media is going to prove its worth. That cracked me up. we just didn't even respect how much time we'd be spending on our computers, like both Zoom and social media and just everything.
And especially like what you're saying about we didn't pick up on mental health. Like we talked about people being isolated and people being lonely, and the people we needed to think about and look out for in our immediate neighborhoods as well as in our church communities. We had no idea about how this was going to challenge us all, like globally, mentally, as well as, physically and emotionally as well. But the loss, the grief, there's just a sense of isolation and disconnection. We mentioned connection, but like feeling disconnected from each other, from our ecclesias, from our friends and family.
Yeah, it's just been a tough challenge for a lot of people, and so much insecurity. Even when you do meet with someone, like you take these risks, and like there's all this thinking. Even when you are having a social experience with someone, that's what kind of drives me crazy too. It's like it doesn't even feel normal when you're trying to make it feel normal right now. Does that make sense? Like you can't get over the fact that we were in a pandemic.
No, for sure. I mean, we've been in a bubble. We stick to those people. We're still being pretty strict about who we see and what we do with them. And yet when I leave my house and I have an interaction with someone outside for like more than half an hour, I come home and I'm exhausted. And then when it's actually in person and face to face, I've forgotten what it's like. As you say, you're still nervous, anxious about like, is this right? Am I socially distancing enough? Do I trust this person? Do they trust me? So you don't relax like you would pre-pandemic.
It's hard to imagine even returning to our normal pace. How do we do that? How do we go back to all the activity that we did have? Because I'm tired. I'm tired from the activity level that we're at now. Which is way less than it was before. But
but then we're having all these interactions virtually, which I'm sure for your work and my work too, like we can be on our screens all the time, talking, and we know Zoom's exhausting, and we also know that Zoom is dissatisfying as well.
Zoom, besides, in the Christadelphian context, it's a permanent change. Like there's so many positives actually to it, which I think will outlast the pandemic. And I want to get to that, but I do think it's interesting that it still is hard, like you're talking about. There's a very clear, like Zoom fatigue is a real thing. I just actually read a Stanford study over the weekend, which I need to forward to you, because there's 4 things you can do to reduce Zoom fatigue. So it is difficult, and it's less than it is clearly less than a human interaction, which we've now learned. I think there was a question whether that was true. Like, I think that's an interesting business, education, life thing that, in 2019, we thought maybe video conferencing will take over the world. And we tested it, and it has not. Like, you can't build trust. You can't really learn. Like, you definitely can't learn as a young person, I believe, over most people. But on the other hand, I think like Zoom, like I have multiple friends in different ecclesias in different parts of the States who are like, we're going to be on Zoom for like midweek class for the rest of our life. Like if a midweek class is a perfect example. Like, get people to drive 45 minutes in the middle of a week to hear just a 1-hour class and drive 45 minutes home. A lot of people have done it because it is an important, it can be like an important pick-me-up, But I think on Zoom, it's just clearly better, especially in an ecclesia that's spread out, over any kind of geographic distance. So, yeah, and I think like we've had a lot of international, like cross-pollination and people meeting together like that way, which is helpful. Like, study days and things with speakers from all over,
Yeah, and Bible readings. Like, there's many Zoom groups that just meet on a weekly basis now for Bible readings. Like, not even as ecclesias, but just as a whole bunch of individuals across nations, just to do their Bible readings together and discuss, which is a richer experience than obviously doing it by yourself, or necessarily just doing it with your ecclesia, because you're being exposed to a broader range of believers, with different experiences and views. So that's richer. I think back to, I guess, my childhood, like I had a headmaster who always said, the more you put in, the more you get out. And of course, there is limitations with how much you can input or participate in Zoom to then get out. Whereas going to meeting in person, there is so much that happens around the service, which
Right.
isn't formal. Those rich conversations, those connections, and of course, the sense of music and that
Yes.
little feeling of togetherness and God's presence being there. And we know that God is greater than all of this. We know that coming together, even for the Zoom meeting, God, of course, understands our hearts and minds are in the right place. But there's nothing like that feeling of togetherness where a whole room full of people lifts up in song, or where someone says a prayer and you all feel just such a sense of togetherness and being united. You can't replicate that.
No. Yeah, it has not worked.
Sundays are different. Sundays were always different anyway pre-pandemic. They were always special. They're meant to be special for us. They are like our Sabbath. Yeah, post-pandemic, Sundays still have to be special.
I don't think I really understood how much you actually needed to worship with people before, right? I think I figured that it was kind of a solo exercise. Like you can just raise your thoughts, on your own in some kind of way. Because I feel like when I'm at the hall, when I'm at the ecclesia, sometimes this is a personal time. But the thing is, you are with people, and you're together having that personal time, right? You can't do it routinely over and over at home. And I just didn't know that. I didn't respect that before. And it is like where two or three are gathered in my name. Like we quote that verse in Matthew with the idea of it being two or three people. Okay, now that's a church, right? But like gathering in the name is a different idea. Like being there with the same purpose, right? Is something that I didn't respect. I didn't really understand until this.
And we're members of one body. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were saying that church is not a health club. Church is not a gym. Like if you're a member of a gym or health club, you go, you don't have to interact with anyone and then you go home again. Church is not that. It's the opposite, in fact. It's not, you're not just going for your own spiritual health. You're going for the spiritual health of other people. And ultimately, all together to give glory to God and the Lord Jesus.
Again, there's a gift, I think, of the international kind of aspect of it. Like Jess and I spent one lunch and dialed into Birmingham South's Wednesday night, their midweek class, because it's our 12 o'clock lunch hour. And like, it was a blast, like we have no way of ever, maybe once in our life, we could go to a midweek class in England, I've spoken in India for their midweek class, I've spoken in Canada and different ecclesias here in LA area too. It's like there is definitely a neat bonding that's happened because of technology and because of the times. So I hope that continues on. I think the Christadelphian community at large has just, been through it with all this. And there's, so much division that's existed that in a way was shaken again. Ecclesias that you could really find who you agreed with when you don't have to physically show up anywhere because you could go to meeting wherever you wanted now.
For sure. So your allegiance to your own ecclesia or that sense of identity and just being a member of an ecclesia, which we can become overly obsessed with, like, oh, where do you come from? I come from this ecclesia.
Right.
Has become less meaningful because we realize that actually we are all members of one body,
right?
And that's more important than where you might go on a Sunday or where you might meet on midweek Bible class. It doesn't mean that the members of your ecclesia aren't important. They, of course, are still really important as part of your spiritual family and probably geographically the closest spiritual family you have. But you don't have to be identified by your ecclesia. And ultimately, like Scripture says that we shouldn't be. In fact, we have to just identify with Jesus.
I definitely think one of the lasting lessons learned was kind of this Zoomification of our community and just the, that the barrier is kind of broken down, the spatial issues. On the other hand, I think I see that both ways. Like, I feel like, we'll be able to, dial in wherever we want, but also we do need the people that are physically close to us more than ever. I didn't think we did as much as we do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's been that's the criticism of social media and technology, isn't it? That we become so global. This was even pre-pandemic. Become so global, we don't know who our neighbors are. We don't talk to our neighbors. We with we don't have these real interactions because we're so used to like having digital interactions. So that was happening anyway. When we were in real lockdown, stay-at-home orders, we literally could only have face-to-face conversations with our neighbors, like from our front
Yep.
steps or over the fence,
Yep.
etc. Or maybe if you happen to bump into, well, you shouldn't even bump into someone in the grocery store, but there would be those kind of conversations, and that's just so important. I've got
Yep.
to know my neighbors better this year, even though I haven't lived in my community that long. And actually, just on Sunday, our neighbor turned 50, and people were just invited to the street wearing masks just to sing happy birthday. And then he just gave a speech from his front steps. And I don't think we would have done that pre-pandemic. And we were just
I've learned more about
in the cold, in the dark, but
right.
just happy to see each other, and just happy just to have that moment just to sing happy birthday and to say that
Right.
we cared. And gosh, when I think about when I see all my ecclesia again, like, and I can actually hug them
Yeah.
and talk to them and connect with them, I think that's like 10 times the amount of like a happy birthday, of someone important.
Yeah. I would hope we're all looking forward to that, kind of that first Sunday back feeling for most ecclesias that are still not meeting in person. I think that's definitely an exciting day. Yeah. I've learned my neighbors way more than I ever thought. Like now I know all the names of people on my street. I only knew maybe 4 before, And I was at the park yesterday. So we have a park in our neighborhood. It's a short walk away, and I took Pippa there on Saturday, so 2 days ago. And a neighbor walked by who's walked her dog. She's a middle-aged lady. I've never met her. I didn't ask her name actually this time, but I said to her like, "Hey, good to see you," because I walked up to her. I run around and see her walking her dog in the mornings. I said, "This has been the year that we've gotten to know our neighbors, and nice to see you." And she said, "Yeah, your daughter's getting older." It's just there's these like casual interactions that would not have happened because I think we're all spending more time doing this too. Like being outside is one of the only breaks that we get. So.
Even if you did have those interactions before, I feel like they're more genuine now. We've all been so isolated, so that when we do have those interactions, they are more meaningful, and therefore we are making kind of more effort to not just be polite and make casual conversation, but really care about each other. I think we have all learned that going forward, that we do need to be more intentional with the everyday. Like it doesn't have to be the big things. It can just be the lady in the park.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's just a more local awareness that's definitely happened.
What do you miss about pre-pandemic interactions and church? And
I still miss. So church, I think, is interesting in that I miss like just unplanned conversations.
mm-hmm.
Like every conversation I have now is planned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't see someone and be reminded that I need to talk to them about something. So I have to remember to intentionally reach out to them. Like at church, it was, there's Richard. I need to talk to him about this thing that's coming up, or just casually checking in. Like checking in has become more formal as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't just quickly say something to someone. I think a party is the same deal. You can't ever be in a group of 20, 30, 40 for some event, and like that also would be a casual, like you run in with someone that you weren't planning. I guess it's that. It's everything's so intentional, which can be draining too.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just coast along.
I think we can overthink it and therefore not be relaxed in our thoughts, conversation. And I think spiritually there's an element that we do need to let God into that. God works with the spontaneity when we are most open and we're being most free. And if we just plan everything, we're not necessarily putting God in that plan, even in like just parceling everything up in terms of time slots and
right.
And even when am I going to talk to someone? Like if the phone rings and it's not planned, do you think it's an emergency? Well, no, it shouldn't. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, it shouldn't be.
That person just has called called you spontaneously because they've been thinking about you and they just want to connect with you. And those are the kind of conversations where God can be in them.
I feel like just hearing ourselves now, like we're so, again, comparing back to that episode a year ago, like a year ago we were so positive, just so like, oh, this will be great. Like even I'm going to read the Kitty O'Meara poem, which I read a year ago. And like I read that with a positivity, and it's an interesting read now because it's a poem. I guess I'll lead into it now. It's a poem, the people poem by a retired teacher, and she wrote it immediately, basically at the beginning of kind of lockdowns. And it's interesting because when I read it a year ago for this podcast, I read it kind of with a full positivity. We were so hopeful. We thought it was just going to be a short amount of time. We thought this is all, like a tragedy, but a minor tragedy, right? I think I've really been comparing it lately to like this is a wartime. This is World War II of our generation in a way, right? Just in how it's affected everything and everyone, and right, been a massive loss of not only of human life but of resources, like the dual tragedy of the human cost and the economic cost. But anyway, so when I read it now, the poem, it just has a different tone.
For sure. Yeah, and we
So,
have to acknowledge how much loss there has been, and that so many people have lost loved ones, colleagues, friends, and
right.
they haven't been able to grieve either. Like,
True.
it's hard to grieve anyway when you lose someone, but this has been such a time of enormous loss where we can all be quite absorbed with what we're doing and just coping from day to day, that it's even harder to try and support people who are really struggling.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're both acknowledging that we are tired. Like, this has been going on a long time. We're exhausted. We feel drained, and we are yearning for healing and nourishment and rest.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that's totally a great point. There hasn't even been a mourning period because it hasn't ended yet, right? We don't know what more losses there will be. I mean, again, I'm very hopeful, very, very hopeful for the future, right? But yeah, let me read the poem. So Kitty O'Meara and the people stayed home. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently. And the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and heal the earth fully as they had been healed.
It's very spiritual. There's some real beautiful kind of kingdom type images in there.
Right.
And this in just the spirit of Christ, of peace, of healing, of reunion and connection, restoration.
And part of that's depressing to me because I think already some of her, because this was written in the first month of the pandemic, and some of her hopefulness has proven wrong, which is, because it's just bigger than what she imagined when she did that. I don't think it's something that's measurable in a poem, but I do think there are still principles in there, but I think a lot more people met their shadows than she had imagined initially in that poem. And I would love to think that things will be better in a way after, but I think already we've seen, by a division in how to handle this and some of the lies that people have believed over the last year about it is another thing.
Human nature can't change ultimately,
right.
But we have a choice as humans to be more godly and loving or not. Even though we've been challenged this past year in so many different ways, we all still have those choices. Every day we have a choice of how we're going to live, how we're going to behave, how we're going to share, interact, give something of ourselves instead of taking, ultimately. Even the grocery store interactions, we were talking about people being greedy or people not thinking of others, and that kind of panicky, anxious behavior, which makes us behave really irrationally and only think of ourselves and our immediate family or the people we're living with and not anyone else.
Yeah, there's
those anxious feelings, because whenever we do, and go into that real survival mode, we just become blind to like the most important things and the most important people around who really need us.
There's an awareness that like I would put that at the feet of some people who get frustrated about masking laws, or I think earlier on in the pandemic as well, people were like, well, I don't even know anybody who's had it yet. It's like, well, there are people who have had it. You just need to learn about more people, and then I think that's changed. I think the national conversation about the pandemic has kind of shifted, but that was frustrating too, because it's a selfishness essentially. Like, well, it's not affecting me, right? And that's been fascinating. I mean, as far as the economic damage, like how this has affected, the food service industry, like primarily, and how that's not white collar people. It's families who have two jobs, and they've lost both of them instead of the one job. It's an interesting. There's just been there's been a disparate effect. It's not it's not an overall across the board effect. It affects some people some way and some people an entirely different way.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that even in our area, like the differences between some families and others in their access to education, their access to technology, especially when these children can't go to school, for example, like huge inequality, especially with these children not being able to go to school. Even it's harder to feed children when they're really hungry. You and I have never really been hungry.
Correct. Yeah, it has shown the inequality that has existed. It's just highlighted it.
Mm-hmm. But I think for many people in the Christadelphian community, it has encouraged us to give and to share and to think about those who are vulnerable. Lots of people have been giving to food pantries or sleeping bags or different things, different way, and even thinking internationally, are believers all around the world who have been in need and been able to meet their needs because we've known more about them and their needs. But also just the leveler of coronavirus. Yes, people have experienced it in many different ways, but it's also been quite a leveler, and that it's affected us all.
Yeah, it has been. Again, that's what reminds me of it being a wartime. Like everybody knows what's going on. Everyone's a part of the same story, and it's tragic, right? And we wish that we weren't here and doing this, which I think relates again to the selfishness versus the selflessness. Like wars are defeated when everyone is fighting against it. So
yeah, we do have a common enemy, which is obviously the COVID, and people too easily get caught up thinking that the other person who disagrees with them is the enemy. Yet it's not.
Yeah.
Like, we are, of course, all the same, really. Ultimately, we're all human. We're all made in God's image and in His likeness. We just forget that too easily when we're faced with conflict from another, just because they think and behave in a different way to how we do. But I hope this whole time, what do we learn? I hope we have learned to be more empathetic and to try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, I do. I know everyone will be changed by the experience, but yeah, I do hope that it's in positive ways. That poem is so positive. And I just don't trust it anymore after this. I guess I'm just in a lower place as far as people wanting to just return to how they were before. Like, did we really use this time right? You've probably heard this before, but like, if you didn't have time to learn the thing that you want to do or whatever, make the change you want to make in this last year, you're not going to have time to do it, in the future. So you can just cross it off your list. It's a funny thing, like that, what changes will be permanent,
some of it will be is personal, like the changes are within our control, but there'll be other things that are just beyond our control, and we will react differently to them, whether we can travel or not, whether we can work in a certain place or not, whether we can see certain people or not. Yeah, I was going to read the beginning of Ecclesiastes 3 because I've been thinking about the verse 5, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And it just really hit me the other day that I never really thought about that line in the same way. But I read it last week and I felt quite emotional about reading it. So yeah, I'm going to read Ecclesiastes 3, a time for everything. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
Yeah, wow, that hits different. I haven't read that with this context either.
We don't know what life is going to look like going forward. Both of us, and many of our friends and loved ones, we have the best intentions, how we want things to be different in the future, what changes we want to make, and what time we're living in. We talked about that last year. Is this end times? Is this birth pain?
Yeah. I think that conversation is becoming pretty interesting as well. The quote was from last year. I said, "Things getting worse and being completely terrible is on the table," which I think is a funny quote because that's technically always true, but it just was the timing of that was interesting because it was true. Things did get worse.
Yeah.
But is this the end? In a way, I hope it is. In a way, I hope it's not. There's just definitely been an Armageddon feel, right, to a lot of this.
For sure. At the end of every conversation or message with someone I haven't connected with in a while, it's kind of like, how are you, or how are you doing, or we're doing okay, we're still struggling, we're surviving, but we're fine, we're healthy, right. and we just need Jesus. I feel like that just need Jesus is the end of many messages, more text messages maybe than in-person conversations. And maybe we didn't say that before enough. We did, but when something bad happened, we said we really just need Jesus right now. We need Jesus to return.
Yeah, we didn't feel it. We didn't feel it maybe as much as we feel it now.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of, I think, the last favorite thing that I had about listening back to our podcast a year ago. You said, where would Jesus be during the pandemic? And that's been interesting. I already talked about maybe some regret about how we could have been more productive if you knew you had all this time. If you knew it would be a year like this, we could have made different decisions. But what would Jesus have done during this time? Like if his ministry was during COVID, what would he have done? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, a year ago I said he would be with essential workers. He would be in the hospitals. He would be in the grocery store. He would be at a food pantry. He would, he would be giving out things. He would be with the people who are vulnerable. He would be holding the hand of someone who's dying because none of their relatives can say goodbye to them in person. When I think about people being so close to death in any hospital, a patient is always asked, do you want a religious person of your faith to come to you, and talk to you and pray for you? And, there's been, doctors and nurses have talked about having to be those people because the spiritual leaders couldn't be there, weren't allowed to be there. Neither their friends or family were allowed to be there holding their hands. So, yeah, I feel like that's where Jesus would be. He would be where he always is with those who need him the most, those who are pushed outside. And the people who have been outside have been the essential workers. For those who've been like us, who've been privileged to stay home and be able to work from home, etc., and be with our families, we've been on the inside. We've been a lot safer.
Right.
That verse about Jesus being outside the camp. He went to outsiders. He went to the vulnerable. He went to people on the edge.
Right.
And I think that hit us a lot more, as you say, in the spring. It was very obvious who was on the outside, who was keeping things going, whether it be the postal worker or the grocery store worker or the truck driver, etc.
Right.
All the people that hold our current life together so that, we can have things brought to our doorstep and we don't have to go out and get them.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that you're absolutely right. I think he would have found there's so much opportunity for service to others here in this time, and I think he would have found those same paths, those same places to be, which definitely is a lesson for us. I mean, we should be considering how we can help in our ecclesias, outside of our ecclesias, in our neighborhoods, and people who are feeling marginalized during this time too, and just being that connection, being that angel, right? That messenger of God's will, really. That's what we're talking about.
And also Jesus called out the leaders of his day as well when they were unjust.
Right.
When they didn't make good decisions, when they did things where they should have known better, like because they knew the law. Yeah, I mean, that's probably could be another discussion, but I think he wouldn't have shied away if he was here now, in terms of being very much present in the pandemic. Of course, we know Jesus is with us. I'm sure he'd have something to say about those who've been responsible through this whole time and those who've been irresponsible.
Right. Yeah.
Even about the basic care for the people that you lead, the people you're meant to look after. Yeah, we all have that responsibility to look after one another.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that was true before, but we've never felt it like we felt it over the last year. That's for sure.
What have you found positive over this past year? What have you learned that has been uplifting?
I think there has been some really beautiful parts. I mean, besides kind of the closeness to the neighbors, which we were talking about, there was a period of time where, so I referred to that park that Pippa and I walked to. It's just down the block, and it has a big field in it. And there was a period of time where the park was closed, right? It must have been early in the summer, and because that was a part of the lockdown. But we would still walk to the park because that was kind of our routine. But we'd get to the field and we would just run in the field. That was the goal of the trip, right? For Pippa and I. Pippa's 2. And we would just go running in the field. We'd take our shoes off and run in the field. And I had this moment, one of those times where I was like, I want to remember this forever. Like, what dad gets to literally frolic in a field with their 2-year-old daughter, right? Just on on every beautiful sunny day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I wanted to really respect how that was a blessing, and that has been a blessing. It's a beautiful memory that I'm going to have forever. So there's these strange, in this time of kind of sadness and negativity and separation, there's some really beautiful family times. I mean, I've had more meals with my wife and my daughter in the last year than probably twice as many as I would have had in a normal year. There are definitely blessings and just a respect for those moments. What about you? What were some of the good parts?
I feel that even though I found children being home a lot and virtual school and all that being really challenging, I've watched my children grow over this past year. I've spent more time with them, obviously, but listened to them more deeply, spent more time reading stories, spent more time just having rich conversations over meals, or just those funny questions where children ask you lots of questions, and conversations can go in any direction. And I think that's been really beautiful. And also I think with Johnny and I, our relationship, our marriage, obviously we don't have our parents around anyway, living in the US, we've got no grandparents around to support us. So we haven't had as much of a support network to help with the children. So the two of us really have had to really work together. Well, firstly, just for us both to get our work done each day, and to parent, and just to keep on top of regular chores. But then connect and really work together as a team. And sometimes it does just feel survival mode. And I think, marriage and relationships can, of course, always have those times where it feels like it's survival mode and not enjoying it. But getting to those points where you feel stronger and it feels richer, and you're just sustaining each other. There's more trust.
Yeah, we had I've said to a few people that I've been really blessed. Our marriage has been blessed in that I think it was just a really good, important time kind of in our family timeline so Jessica resigned from her job 3 months before the pandemic started to kind of begin a stay-at-home mom kind of life, right, with Pippa. And I think we both needed to respect what the other was doing during the day. And it's just a fact that like I was beginning to resent Jess staying home all day with Pippa, right? And I think she was also beginning to resent me getting to leave for the day, right? But when I had to work from home, I kind of was able to, we had the time for me to kind of bring Jess in on what I do for work. And we had the time for me to see more of what actually happens, with her doing solo parenting for most of the day, and I think it was an interesting, like, just mutual respect growth time, which I've been so thankful for. Again, also just thankful for my wife and my life, because my heart's been breaking for many relationships who had other problems that have been exacerbated by this time. But yeah, I'm just very, very thankful for what we've been able to learn together like that, and just all the Pippa time, my daughter, all that time has been a wonderful, wonderful blessing.
And the few people that we have seen on a regular basis, like in our bubble, I feel like those relationships have grown and are richer too. And instead of just kind of asking questions about work or like, how's your week been, we've gone deeper. We've been more open and honest with each other. And it's going back to what we were saying earlier about being genuine and intentional in a good way.
Right.
We've talked about being intentional where it almost being too intentional and things are too structured, so there's no spontaneity. But then in these close relationships, in our family, in our marriage, with our children, like there is more intention there, more thoughtfulness.
Yeah, and I definitely hope we don't lose that. I do hope that's a permanent lesson for me to just really live in the moment. Because if we've learned anything, we can't predict the future, which we may have known before, but we really learned over the last year.
We've learned to make plans knowing that they could be cancelled easily, and to just let that go. It totally is that letting go and letting God. We have to trust in Him implicitly that He knows best for us in our everyday. We can't cling on to everything being all neat and tidy in our own heads and in our own lives. I have found joy in the everyday because we have to. There has to be hope, even when you're having a really, really tough day, tough pandemic day, like where everything feels challenging, where there could be a lot of conflict in different ways, whether that's like for work or other things going on, but there's hope. We have such a great hope.
Yeah, we do. And so thankful for that hope during this time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.